This episode of the Answer is Yes Baja Sessions is brought to you by Baja Bound Insurance Services. Driving to Mexico? You can buy and print out your Mexican auto insurance policy online in minutes with their easy-to-use website. They also have great travel information to help you plan your trip south of the border. Visit bajabound.com.
Hi, this is Ryan Thomas, and welcome to the Baja Sessions, where we interview interesting people with interesting stories about all things related to the majestic peninsula of Baja California. Today's guest is a gentleman by the name of Daniel Ixcot. He was born in Guatemala and raised in Tijuana. He's married with a daughter, and he runs the El Oasis Orphanage, located just out of Valle de Trinidad. And I'm going to make a special statement right now before we get into this interview. Go to the show notes and look for the email address or the phone number and send a message making a commitment for $30 a month. Then listen to the podcast and you'll understand why. Hey, Danny, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Ryan. Thanks for this invitation.
Yeah, I'm really happy to get the chance to sit down and speak with you. It's been a while since we saw each other in person. I feel like we may have seen each other here within the last couple of years, but it really was, I think, probably close to 6, maybe 7 years ago that we were down at your orphanage, or the orphanage you were working at, and I definitely want to get into that. But before we dive right into that, let's dive into a little bit about your past. And you told me before the show started that you were born in Guatemala and currently live in Tijuana. Can you bring the audience and myself up to speed to how we ultimately ended up meeting at an orphanage?
Well, I've been working for El Oasis Orphanage for almost 19 years now.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you talked about my parents and that I was born in Guatemala. And Guatemala has a lot to do with how I ended up in Baja. International Children's Care, it's a nonprofit organization that started the first orphanage that they run in Guatemala in 1976. My father was invited to work with them as an administrator for their orphanage when I was 10 years old. And I always wanted to come back to that orphanage and do, a volunteer work because when I was a kid, I used to see the volunteers that would come and build a school, a home, or kitchen, anything. So International Children's Care, or we call it ICC, started an orphanage here in Baja, and they invited my parents to come and start the orphanage here in Baja, since they had several years of experience working with them. Back in those days, I was in college studying near Monterrey, Mexico. And when I finished, I got the invitation to come and help them. So I thought probably this is the right call, from God, because I always wanted to do something for the children. And now I have the chance and the opportunity to not just come for a mission trip, but to probably be working 24/7 for these children. So that's how I ended up with my wife. We were only married like 10 months back in those days when we arrived to the orphanage. And it was good for her because she is children's psychology. So it was, kind of the right place for her to be too.
So when you say arrive at the orphanage, are you referencing Oasis there outside of Trinidad?
Yes,
okay.
Oasis outside in Trinidad.
So were you guys the founders then of that orphanage, or did you come in to run it after it had been founded?
My parents pretty much were the first administrators of the orphanage. That was back in 1997 when they opened the doors to receive the first kids that came from DIF, which is the Mexican government agency that takes care of the orphan and abandoned children in Mexico. And they brought us 21 kids to the orphanage of El Oasis. My parents were there to receive them, and then they retired from working many years with in Guatemala and then here in Mexico. And we stayed working until now. I'm the development director for the orphanage.
So again, to clue our listeners in here, Danny is talking about an orphanage that is outside of a small town called Valle de Trinidad. And those of you that know the northern part of the peninsula or are involved with any aspect of off-road racing, you probably know where Valle de Trinidad is. But if not, it is, what is it, about an hour and 20 minutes south of Ensenada? Southeast of Ensenada,
correct.
yeah.
80 miles south from Ensenada,
right.
Southeast.
And it's in a beautiful setting, in kind of a high desert meadow area with mountains on both sides, not too far from the turnoff to Mike's Sky Ranch, if I remember correctly, right?
That's correct, yeah.
Maybe 4 or 5 miles down the road for that turnoff. So you took over there from your parents. They started in 1997, and when did you actually step in and fill their shoes?
I started working with them in 2000, in
Okay.
November 26, 2000.
So there is a bit of a story that you shared with me, just the tidbits of, and we kind of know a little bit about it, and that is the connection between El Oasis and Malcolm Smith, which Malcolm Smith, again, to those listeners that are familiar with anything to do with off-road racing, know who Malcolm Smith is. If you're not familiar with that, Malcolm is an iconic motorcycle racer with tons of success in the two-wheel racing world and then also the business world. Can you tell us about that first encounter or how Malcolm got involved with El Oasis?
Well, Malcolm tells that after experiencing so much of the beauty of Baja racing and just, riding with friends, he thought that he would like to give back to Baja of a little bit of all what he received. And he thought that probably the best way to do it was to give back to kids, to the children of Baja, because he saw the need of many places, children's in the streets, and a friend of him suggested him to work with El Oasis even before the first kids arrived, and the reason why was this. Malcolm, as he tells the story, his older son, Joel, was a teenager kid, and he was getting into some teenager troubles. And he decided, or somebody told him or advised him, to send him to a Christian academy in Loma Linda, California. He was so pleased to the results that he saw the changes in his son, and he decided to send his other kids, Alexander and Ashley, to the same academy. The same person who advised him to send his kids to that academy told him that the same church was opening this orphanage in Valle de Trinidad. So he thought, if they are going to treat the kids as they treat my kids, if they're going to educate these kids as they educate my kids in the school, I want to support them. I believe that's probably, a good organization. So that's how he started helping us even before the first kids arrived in 1997.
What a cool story. And, I feel like I need to at least just thank you and your family. Not that you've done anything necessarily directly for me, but it's very clear that you and your family have the heart of a servant, or the hearts of servants, to give the way you have of your time and so on, to create opportunities for kids with no parents. It's not for everybody, and the time that I did spend there at El Oasis, like I said, about 6 or 7 years ago, it was short, it was brief. It was a special time, but it was, I'll be honest, for me, very, very difficult. I was not a parent yet. I am today. And it's even worse or harder to think about it being a parent. But to be around kids that are all the different things, abused, abandoned, is a difficult thing for many people, myself included. So at this point, just a big thank you to you and your family for putting the effort and the time, and I'm assuming the dollars, towards giving opportunities to kids that wouldn't otherwise have those opportunities. So,
Well, thank you, Ryan, and I appreciate your words, and I think there's a couple of things that I would like to add to what you just said. Number one, I think this is a lot of work, and it's not one or two people that can make it happen. It's definitely only through people like you and your friends that arrived that day at the orphanage, bringing donations and trying to help our children. It's only through people that care enough to bring food, bring toys, and try to see how they can make our children's life a little bit better. So it's like a chain. We are just one link in that big chain of people that are bringing blessings to our children. And the other good thing, or the other thing that I would like to add is, it's probably a lot of work. It's probably a lot of time and, as you said, even dollars and money invested. But the satisfactions to see the children that have changed their lives, and now they are either in college and university, they already graduate from university, they are working, they are getting married, they are having their own children and starting their own family, but with a totally different ideal, with a new vision of life. That's the best you can get. I mean, the reward of all the efforts. So
I wanted to ask you, and you kind of just went there on your own. The success stories, there have to be. I'm hoping there are many. Do any of them stand out? I mean, and maybe that's not fair. They should all stand out, but that's got, like you said, that's a driving force behind what you do. Are there some that stand out?
Definitely. Like you said, it's hard to pick because there are several good stories. But I'd like to share with you a story of one of our kids. And the reason why I like to share his story, it's because he's one of the first kids who arrived to the orphanage. The very first time that we opened the doors to receive children in December 1997, he came with his siblings. And today, he is studying in a university near Monterrey, Mexico. He is finishing dental, or to be a dentist. And we are so proud of his story, because when he arrived, he was 4 years old. He was the oldest of the family, and his name is Ricardo. His youngest brother is Manuel, who is also in the same university, also studying to be a dentist. He's just a couple of years